Welcome to That's How God Rolls, a podcast about walking with God, learning to hear His voice, and discovering the healing He works in the hidden places of our lives. Hey friends, welcome back to That's How God Rolls. Today we're diving into one of the most consistent images used in the Bible to describe how God relates to people, leaders, and institutions, and that is a vineyard. This image appears across the Old Testament and the New, from the prophets to the teachings of Jesus, and it reveals a great deal about how God acts in the world, and how to recognize those actions. So let's walk through it together. A vineyard isn't a weekend project. You don't just plant a few vines and hope for the best. In the ancient world, vineyards took years before they produced anything. You had to clear stones, build walls, put up a watchtower, plant carefully, tend constantly. A vineyard was a long-term investment: patience, responsibility, commitment. This is why the prophet Isaiah uses vineyard imagery to describe Israel's relationship with God. In the Song of the Vineyard, in Isaiah 5, God describes himself as a careful gardener who has done everything necessary for fruitfulness. When fruit fails to appear, the issue is not neglect on God's part, but the vineyard's refusal to produce what it was designed for. The fruit God seeks is not economic success or outward strength. Isaiah makes this explicit. God looked for justice but found bloodshed, for righteousness but heard cries of distress. The vineyard image shows that judgment in Scripture follows excessive care, not impatience. One of the most misunderstood aspects of God's judgment is its nature. In Isaiah 5, God does not destroy the vineyard outright. Instead, He removes its hedge and allows it to experience exposure. This pattern appears repeatedly. Judgment often takes the form of withdrawn protection, not sudden violence. This tells us something crucial about how God acts. He allows human agency plenty of space to operate. He warns, corrects, and waits. Only when correction is persistently refused does God allow the consequences of that refusal to unfold. Jesus picks up Isaiah's vineyard imagery directly in the parable of the wicked tenants. The vineyard is carefully prepared and entrusted to tenants, but they mistake stewardship for ownership. When servants, and eventually the son, are rejected, the vineyard is not destroyed. Instead, stewardship is transferred. This is a critical theological insight. God's judgment does not always mean the end of a thing. Sometimes it means the reassignment of responsibility. Institutions, leadership structures, and even religious systems can lose their entrusted role while the underlying purpose continues elsewhere. In another vineyard parable, the workers in the vineyard in Matthew 20, Jesus shows that God's justice does not operate according to human systems of merit. Latecomers receive the same wage as early workers. This is not inefficiency. It is generosity. Here, vineyard imagery reveals that God actively disrupts entitlement, exposing resentment and envy. God's action often appears unfair by human standards, because it is governed by mercy rather than transaction. In John 15, Jesus reframes the whole vineyard metaphor around his church. Jesus says, "I am the true vine. People are branches, and the Father remains the gardener." No longer is the vine a nation or institution. Christ flows through each and every one of us. This passage introduces the concept of pruning. Pruning is not punishment for failure, but preparation for greater fruitfulness. Fruitful branches are pruned precisely because they are alive. This challenges the assumption that loss always signals abandonment. Jesus tells us that pruning, difficulties and hardship, can be a sign of care and preparation for something greater God plans to achieve through us. When you look across all these vineyard passages, a pattern emerges. It's almost like a rhythm of how God works. Preparation, entrustment, expectation, patience, warning, pruning or judgment, restoration or transfer. And when you see that pattern show up in your own life, in leadership, in institutions, it often means God is acting as gardener, not destroyer. Measured loss, long warning, exposure rather than chaos, clarity emerging through reduction. These are signs of vineyard judgment, not abandonment. The vineyard image teaches us that God is not reactive. He's not impulsive. He's attentive, patient, purposeful. He cares about fruit, not appearances. And when he acts decisively, it's always in continuity with long care already given. And above all, Scripture insists that God's aim is life. Even judgment serves that end. So the invitation Jesus gives, abide, is still the invitation today. Stay connected. Stay open to pruning. Stay honest about fruit. Because the God who tends vineyards is still at work. Thanks for listening. If this episode stirred something in you, feel free to share it with someone who might need it. And as always, keep watching for how God rolls.